Okay, so this plaster I've let set up for probably um, maybe 2 hours or so. I mean, you could pour it and let it set overnight. I'm opening it up a little early, but plaster needs to go through a process of curing, which I'm just going to take a blade here and sort of just crack the cup. What's nice about kind of the container, using a container like, I'm gonna retract this blade a little bit so it's not as dangerous. I'm just cracking the cup. But what's nice about using something like a ready-made cup like this is that I have another one that I could plop this mold into in order to cast it again. So, I mean, I could tape this back together and use that cup again. But so we have the plaster and we have the alginate. Now, one thing that's kind of unfortunate about that I should have done when I made this mold is I should have taken note of where my parting, where my hand, the orientation of my hand, so that I could have cut this mold open without kind of destroying it too much. Because if I could kind of break it open, I can kind of cast into it again. So I'm just going to carefully try to figure out the orientation of everything. So I'm sort of peeling open the mold, and then I'm going to basically pull the fingers out, trying not to rip the alginate. I mean, I could very easily rip the alginate to help get it out easier, but the less damage I do to the mold, the more I can use it. So here is the casting. It's a little wet, but there's some pretty good detail, and like little pieces of alginate that got torn off there. I can just pick those out, and that is the alginate cast, or the plaster cast of my fingers. There's kind of it's a little wet. It'll dry off. I don't know if you can see in the camera, but you can definitely see the fingerprints and all the detail. So alginate I'll just set this over here to the side. Alginate will dry out and shrink and crack. But one thing, I've noticed is that I could then put this mold, because it's still fine. You want to clean the plaster residue off of it, but you could stick that back into another cup, right? And cast into it again. And it's kind of interesting when you keep casting into the alginate, the cut that was made into the alginate will come out in your casting, but it's very easy to remove. And I find all of that archiving of the process, it gets really interesting, because there'll be like a kind of a plane that's going through the object. And if you take this whole cup and you put it inside of a plastic bag and you put a twist tie on it and you seal it so that the moisture can't evaporate out of the alginate mold will last quite a while. It's where it dries out. So like these thin little fins of the alginate, they'll dry out and they'll get hard and they'll shrink. And when it dries out, then it's harder to cast material into it. So I could right now mix up more plaster and pour it into this mold and get another casting just like this, except it will have kind of a seam where I cut the alginate. But as long, and since plaster cures, right, it doesn't air dry, it cures. I could fill this up with plaster and put the plaster and the cup, the whole thing, in a plastic bag and seal it, and this will cure, but the alginate will not dry out. And you could just keep using the mold over and over again. So when I cast this hand, I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll try to make this a shorter video. My fingers were going straight down. If I would have hooked them up, like this, then I would have had an issue with air entrapment in the tips of my fingers. And also the alginate would have been trapped where my fingers are. So it would have been a little bit, I would have had to cut the mold up a little bit more to get it out. So I kind of intentionally made it really, I kept my fingers together, and I intentionally made it so that the alginate would be a little bit easier to get off of the form and still stay intact. Anyways, that is a basic intro to casting fingers, and you can use the same method to cast a whole hand. You can really experiment with the material. It's like, I can also provide you with some demos that are not my demos for casting a face or casting parts of a face, using plaster bandage to support the material. It's a really versatile material. You can cast some objects, you can cast with it. You don't have to only cast fingers. It just has some properties to it that you have to pay attention to. It doesn't stick to itself, and it does dry out. So as long as you kind of prevent it from drying out, you can kind of reuse it.